webinar. And welcome everybody. My name is Ha Nguyen. I'm a product partner here with Amidior Network. And this webinar has been brought to you by the Emerging Tech Group at Amidior Network. A little bit about Amidior Network before we get started. Amidior Network was started by Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, and since 2004 has made over $1 billion in for-profit investments and non-profit grants. And the group that I belong to is the Emerging Tech team here at Amidior Network, and we invest in early stage for-profit, purpose-driven tech startups who want to build world-changing companies and create positive impact at scale. So throughout today's webinar, you can type your question in for Mandy at any time during into the Q&A chat box, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So I'd love to now introduce today's instructor, Mandy Cole. Mandy and I used to work at Stella & Dot together, where she was the SVP of sales there. And so I can vouch for how incredible Mandy is. Mandy is also the founder of Cole Method, and she helps currently startups scale their sales programs. Prior to starting her own consulting practice, Mandy has made a habit of scaling and developing high-performing teams and big brand startups, including at Living Social, at Zenefits, at My New Place, Main Street Hub, and others. So welcome, Mandy. I'm excited to have you here today.
Great. Thank you, Ha. I'm excited to be here. And I want to first just tell you all to bear with me a little bit. I have a cold. I do have kids. They're like little petri dishes, and I picked up something from them. So hopefully it won't be too hard to listen to. But I'm really excited to spend some time with you today on the topic that's nearest and dearest to my heart, which is building a kick-ass, high-performing sales team. And as Ha mentioned, please ask questions. We are going to have some polls. It's going to be interactive, but I want y'all to feel comfortable. I know on a webinar, it's even a little harder to be engaging because you're not face-to-face. So I want y'all to, this is a workshop type. I'm going to walk through really 10 steps to building that plan. And so feel free to raise your hand, ask questions about those, and we'll have some time at the end to ask questions as well if there's something specific that you're focused on. A little bit about my background, as Ha mentioned, I've scaled 4 growth stage companies. I've worked for 5 founder CEOs. I've hired over 500 salespeople and 150 sales leaders. And I've interviewed several thousand to get those folks. And that's just me personally. My teams have hired more than that. And I've made a lot of mistakes doing those things. But each time I get better, I get faster and smarter. And today I'm going to share my playbook with you to help you accelerate your revenue growth and also eliminate your sales risk. Now, what would help me make sure that I'm tailoring this would just to learn a little bit about y'all. So we have a couple of questions for you. The first is, if you could give me an idea, these are polls, so of what your current monthly run rate is in revenue.
Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds before we launch the poll. Okay, it looks like we have most of our respondents have submitted their responses, so I'll go ahead and launch the poll now and share the results.
So actually what I expected, I think, you know, when you are now in your growth stage and you're raising around and you're starting to grow, you're typically looking to get to that million and then take it to your next 10 million. So this is great because this is going to be, I think, very applicable to where you are. My second question is, what's the size of your sales team right now?
Okay, we'll go ahead and wait a few seconds for folks to respond. Okay, it looks like we have most of our responses in, so I'll go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Perfect. Okay, good. This is going to be fun. Thank you so much for helping me out. I love to tailor, and thank you, Ha. I want to start, now I know you guys are probably thinking, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about scaling sales teams. Now all of a sudden we're talking about the Warriors, and I am in the Bay Area, so this isn't just a ploy to continue to talk about that great win on Monday night. But I do want to start by sharing a story about Steph Curry that a lot of you may not know. because I think it speaks so highly to really a foundation of high performance. And I'm not sure how many of you know his background. I'll briefly tell you a little bit, but his dad was an NBA star. His brother, his younger brother, also played in college and in the pros. He played for a team that I don't talk about that starts with a D because I went to Carolina, so most of y'all can probably figure out who that is. But growing up, he wasn't as big as his brother, and so when they would be playing in middle school and high school, he got picked a lot last. He was smaller than a lot of the other guys, and so he had to work harder to make sure, and he developed this really strong work ethic. And as he was coming out of college and getting drafted to the NBA, he got invited to Kobe Bryant's Nike Skills Academy. 30 of the brightest that are going into the NBA get invited. He was one of the last chosen to go. And he shows up at the academy, and Alan Stein, who was one of the coaches there, talks about the moment he saw him and the first day, he knew what a success he was going to be. And he describes about, he was the least recognized player, but he showed up every day 30 minutes before the start. So he would have been on the court shooting 100, 150 shots by the time all the other 29 walked in their hoodies and they're listening to their music and their flip-flops. He was drenched in sweat. And he said, all I could think about was his work habits. This is why this guy is going to be a star. It's not necessarily that he's the most talented person ever in basketball, although that lends to it, but he was just meticulous about everything that he did. He had perfect footwork, perfect shooting form, and he didn't need somebody to keep telling him, hey, you should keep trying to change that, or you should keep practicing that. He just did it. He knew that he had to keep doing it to get better. And at the end of the day, and he still does this, by the way, at practice, he wouldn't leave that practice and leave the floor until he had swooshed 5 free throws. And if you watch him on the game, you'll notice how many he swooshes because of that practice. But I think that that's the level of excellence he holds himself to. And when Stein was talking about him, he said, the moral of this story is that success is not an accident. It's a choice. And Steph Curry is one of the best shooters on the planet because he chooses to create good habits. And so are the habits that you have today on par with the dreams that you have for tomorrow? Because that's the question you should be asking yourself every single day. Whatever you do on a regular basis will determine where you will be tomorrow. And that's a great segue into, so what are you doing on a regular basis? How can you create those great, good habits? And how can you avoid some of the common mistakes that I see happen all the time? And yes, by the way, I've made all of these myself. So the first one that I want to talk about, and one of the most common mistakes I see in just talking to companies that call me and say, hey, we need some help, is taking a shotgun approach instead of a sniper approach to customer acquisition. So you want to focus, obviously your product roadmap on making your target customer successful, not trying to sign up any and every customer. And it's natural that in the beginning, especially if you are the one selling and you're trying to figure it out, that you are testing a couple of different targets that may be a fit. But as you get some of that data, really honing in on where you have a customer that is the right fit and focusing is going to make you so much more efficient and effective. Think about it this way. When they're building the championship team, the Warriors don't just go out and sign it. They sign players that are compatible with their playbook and strategy and that they have a role for. So they're really thinking about, this is how we operate. This is what we do. This is our methodology. And we need to sign people that are a fit for that. That's the only way we're going to win. They don't change their whole coaching philosophy to get one player. So similarly, you don't want to sign customers. You want to sign customers that are the best fit for your product. And you don't want to change your whole philosophy or start changing your product and your product roadmap to fit one customer, because that's a very slippery slope, especially when you have a sales team involved. If you start teaching them that the way to go and acquire customers is actually just make your product work for your customer instead of the other way around, you're never going to get the level of efficiency that it'll take to really build a high-performing team. Secondly, before you decide to rapidly scale your customer acquisition, first make sure that you are retaining your target customers. So if you figured out this is our target customer and this is how we're measuring success, then make sure they really are successful. You don't want to be losing them out the back door as quickly as you're putting them in the front door. And famously, we learned this the hard way at Zenefits. I was brought on to scale the SDR team right as we raised the round, our big growth round from Andreessen. And the thought was, hey, we think that there's this, this 100 plus, this enterprise level channel. We think there's big opportunity. We've seen a little bit of success there. I think we signed up 6 customers. We're going to scale this team out and really go just put as many of those opportunities in front of our sales team as we can and close those so we can just take such a big market share and have a big impact there before Workday comes down market. Great in theory, looked like it worked, from a couple of conversations, but the reality was we went out and hired another 200 SDRs, and and as we did this and went after that segment, we found out that our close rate was less than 10% and our churn was over 40%. So very quickly figuring out, and very expensive way to figure out that that's not a product market fit, because that customer wasn't successful. We didn't have the tools, and therefore, because they weren't sustaining, we were obviously spending a lot of money to figure that out. Now, we figured it out quickly because we created thousands of opportunities, but you can do the same thing by going and targeting 50 or 100 and understanding you'll still have that funnel, and make sure that the customers, before you ramp up and you're really starting acquiring at a fast pace, just make sure that you've defined success and that you're keeping those customers on board. Number 3, every winning coach has a playbook that they execute with their team to win. So going back to a basketball analogy, they're not going out and thinking the draft is the end all be all. As long as we draft the right players and we just keep them motivated, give them some high fives, say, well, you know what to do. Go on out there and just play a game and play your best and expect them to win. They have a playbook. They know what they're playing, when they're playing, who's playing. They practice it. They iterate on it. They make sure that it molds to their teams, make sure that their team is continuing to practice and play on that. And somehow that doesn't translate to scaling sales, because what I see from a lot of companies is, all right, we're ready. It's a product market fit. We've got a fit. We're just going to go out and hire a couple people, and I'm just going to turn them loose and let them figure it out. And there are huge negative impacts to this approach. Number one, you're hiring somebody that potentially in the past has not figured it out. They probably were a successful salesperson because they had a process. So coming into a place where there potentially isn't a process or a target market defined, and they're trying to figure that out, it, in a lot of cases, may not be their sweet spot. Or it may be if you hire the right person, but they're not going to be your long-term person. They're going to be something to get enough data so that you can then build that process. The second is that when you are hiring that person, and if you're hiring that person, you don't have a measurable process to evaluate where you can improve, then you're going to be making decisions on emotion instead of data. And I do not ever recommend that. Their data will always tell you the right decision. And it's hard, especially when you're first starting, to not make that decision on emotion. Again, well, if I'm hearing from all my customers that if we had this, they would sign up. If you have a process in place, the data is going to tell you that. And you're going to be able to figure that out quicker and also prioritize your opportunities. And the last reason why there's a huge negative impact is it actually frustrates your salespeople. They're going to be floundering because they're not sure what to do. It drives down their productivity, or potentially they're selling the wrong customer. And then we have that whole situation we just talked about in number 1. And again, that's, a similar situation most recently, but actually at a couple of the companies I've worked in where they've hired a few people and then I've come in as the head of sales. A lot of times these places weren't in place. Zenefits, great example. There was already 30 SDRs. We were now going to scale. First thing I did was sit down and say, okay, well, let me figure out what they're doing, what's working. And I probably sat with 10 different ones in my first week, and they all were doing it differently. Different opening statement, different value prop, different qualifying questions, different ideas as to who the decision maker was. And the problem was that because they were all doing differently, they didn't really they couldn't figure out what was working. So in each of the the SDRs would just, if they tried something 2 or 3 times that wasn't working, then they'd start doing what their neighbor's doing, not knowing if what their neighbor's doing is working either. So as you can imagine, all of this was manifesting itself into people not making their compensation, then feeling like, well, I'm not getting what I promised, creating a lot of negativity on the team, productivity wasn't scaling, Glassdoor reviews were getting harsh. And so it wasn't, we had to fix that situation. And that leads me to number 4, which is making sure you're clearly defining the roles and giving them the support and tools to keep them engaged. So in this situation, we had hired these folks, but we hadn't done the basics that they need to be engaged. And you can see here from Gallup's poll, this is something Strength Finders I'm a huge fan of. I've used it in all of my organizations because it really helps level set, especially with your leaders. What does your team need to feel engaged? And at the basic level, I need to know what's expected of me at work. What is my quota, and what do you expect me to be doing every day to get there? Do I have the materials that I need to do my job? Am I in a position that makes sense for me? Am I excited about what I'm doing and passionate? Or am I getting recognition for when I'm doing it right? And is somebody helping me get better? Because the reality is, you need to define those roles, and you also need to make sure that you're sticking to actually what the purpose of that role is. The other challenge here is you can hire somebody and then they become a catch-all. And I've seen many companies and some of my clients hire an AE and then expect them to, okay, now you're going to source your leads, you're going to schedule your demos, you're going to hold your demos, you're going to close them, you're going to install them, and by the way, keep making sure that they stay on board. And that's, when you're doing that with one person, you're reducing their productivity by 3 or 4 times versus really honing in on what roles you need and making sure that you're being as effective as possible. So when you go in and you can define the role and then put these basics in place, you're going to see, and that's exactly what I did at Zenefits and at Main Street Hub, and we even did a version of this at Living Social. You're going to see quickly a big increase in productivity, retention, and morale, which leads to engagement. And lastly, most people aren't Steph Curry. So they do need, even if you hire that right person, you figure out the role, you get the right person, you got a solid process, you define success, you've given them tools, they still need coaching to improve productivity. They need to get better. And especially in this day and age, lots of folks are, if you have an SDR team, you're hiring somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience, or if you're hiring somebody with a couple of years experience, even if they were the best salesperson where they were before, they're still selling a different product, potentially a different life cycle, different customer, and they need help to get better at that. Not to mention the soft skills part of the job, which I've seen, my top performers, it's just as important. How you manage your time, how you manage your the way that you're interacting with customers, the way that you're working with different decision maker types. So, it's a people business built on science, but that's if you do it right. So don't hire several salespeople without giving them a coach at some point. And maybe it's you initially, but once you're getting enough folks where you don't have the time, you make sure that you're getting a coach, because that is the biggest impact, as you can see here, on performance. But what I see is it's usually the most undervalued activity. Okay, so let's make sure that y'all are still with me. And I want to get your opinion. At first glance, you're drafting your own team. Which of these teams would you choose? All right, how do we have?
Yeah, I think everybody's processing the
numbers.
Options, yes. So we'll just give it about 10 more seconds so that we can get folks selecting.
I like it. You're using the data. I like it. Good start.
I'm trying to parse what it all means.
Oh, so the data. So the data is that was the pick. Each of these are 2 basketball teams, and these picks were their picks in the draft when they were picked. So team number 1 has a lot of first pick out of the draft, 2 first picks out of the draft, 2 fifth picks. So if you want to think about it as they get first choice at arguably what should be the best basketball players.
Okay, great. So it looks like we have the majority of folks submitting their responses. So I'll go ahead and share the results now.
All right, so we've got folks, which given the data that you have, that makes a lot of sense. Team A, they seem to have better people. So if I'm going to go, I want to pick the people that have been deemed as the most talented. I didn't know how that would work out. So y'all
and just for the folks who might be watching the recordings, it looks like 68% chose Team A and 35% chose Team B. So.
Thank you. I forgot that that's not recording. So that worked out well. It's the first time I've done it that way. But I think that that's a great example of it takes more than just good talent to win, and also to win consistently. So you can get the best people. You can go out and hire 5 salespeople that have been selling, that have been, that you think are rock stars. But if you don't have a strategy about who you're selling to and how you're going to do it, you don't have a playbook to execute it, the support and tools they need, and the leadership to drive it, you can't build a consistent high performing team, because all of those pieces work together. And obviously, if you don't have that, the challenge is you're not going to have consistent revenue growth and help you get to where you want, how you want to grow. And I'm sure you're all here because nobody wants that. So how do you do it? Well, first, before we walk through these 10 steps, I'd love to understand what your biggest sales challenge is right now. So I think it's our last poll.
Okay, sorry, 1 second. Let me go ahead and launch the new poll. So the sales challenge, I'll launch it now. So the question is, what is your biggest sales challenge right now? And it's multiple choice. You can select more than one response: building my plan, hiring, productivity, sales process or funnel, or all of it. We'll just give it a few more seconds before we share the results. Okay, looks like we got the majority of folks responding. I'll go ahead and share the poll results.
Great. Okay. So a little bit of everything, but definitely overall sales process. And this is helpful for me because, as Ha and I were talking before we started, I said, I feel like each of these steps could be its own webinar. It is a deep dive. So today we'll talk about, in general, the process and the order and some specifics around those. And then obviously I can take some specific questions as well. But it'll help you narrow down, okay, I have this, I don't have this, and this is where I need to go and do your own deep dive. So let's start with overall. High-performing sales organizations are, like I said earlier, I think of them as a people business, but built on science. And many organizations put pieces of these in place, but it takes all of it. Having the right plan, having a really repeatable, scalable process, and the people management. What are you doing to continue to engage and grow your talent to really build a sales machine? And we're going to walk through how all of these fit together. So number one, and I'm doing it in order, is run the stats. So the first thing you have to do, I'm sure all of you have a goal of something you want to accomplish by the end of the year, a revenue goal. And so I'm sure the first thing you've done is say, okay, how am I going to get there? And what I always do for my clients, first off, is I need to understand that too, because number one, is it realistic? Number two, does it match what's actually happening in their funnel right now? So what their actual process is. And then number three, what are the levers that we can pull so that you can, see short-term and long-term results? So gather up the data that you have so far. And in the most simplistic view, think about it as it's a combination of the things you see in purple here, right? Number of deals that are closed times the revenue per deal times the number of people that you have closing them is a proxy for how you're going to drive your revenue. But before you add more people and go towards that third one, I would get the first two consistent. So make sure that you build a process so that you understand, okay, what is a consistent number of deals I should be getting from my team? And by the way, is my cost of acquisition in line? A good measure there that a lot of folks use is half of your ARR, so your first year's revenue. And in some cases, you may decide you're going to spend a little more of that because your long-term value is longer. But and again, those are things that you're going to have to decide in your plan. But at least understand right now, how many deals can my people close? What is our average revenue per deal? And then from there, what can I do to push both of those? So number of deals, you're going to back into activity in your funnel. We're going to talk about that a little more in measuring what matters. And in revenue, you're going to look at everything from the skills that your team have, which is a big part of it, to your target market. Are you putting the right people in front of them? Do they have the tools they need to close them? And do they have the skills they need to close them? And also around your pricing strategy. Get those things and feel comfortable with those things. And then it's a lot easier to add people, because not only can you show those people the roadmap to be success, but then you can feel more confident that you're not going to see an overall drop in productivity longer term. Second piece, once you've got your plan, is building your ideal customer profile. Again, this is, we talked about not signing up everything and everyone, which is probably the most common thing I see. And it makes sense because you're still trying to understand your funnel. And by the way, you've got friends and family and you're talking about your company and you're really excited and all these things are coming in, and it's a natural instinct to say, well, how could I just make it work for everyone? That's what we just do as people. But the reality is, now that you're getting salespeople on board, you need to make sure that they are focused on bringing in the customers that you know that your product is a fit for, and that you know that you can service and that are going to be happy, because that's your brand longer term. And the better you're getting at that, the more market share you're going to get, the easier you can start getting network effects and efficiencies around that. So in order to do that, because I get this a lot, and I'm going to use an example from one of my clients here. In order to do that, people say, well, but how do I figure that out? I'm not sure that I have enough, or we're not such a vertical play. We don't only go after people in this vertical. And that makes sense. But what you can do once you've signed some customers is just go and pull your customer list. And you can even just do this in Excel. This is what I do. And I just pull together a big Excel file, and I have, the customer's name, the date that they signed up, or, calculate how many months they've been live, their gross revenue, their net revenue. And then I look at some of the key segmentation. So if you look at the most popular ways to segment, so what is their industry or vertical? Where are they located? So their geography. What were they using previously if they were using something? And by the way, you're going to start to see why it's important to capture this in your CRM. And if there are any other attributes that matter to your business model. So for example, at Zenefits, we got paid on the number of employees. They had full-time employees. So actually number of employees size was really important to us. And that's something that we looked at when we started doing more targeting and really narrowing down our ideal customer profile. And then what you want to do is understand what's happening now. How quickly are you signing those? So I look at that from your time to demo to close. So looking at what percentage of those, if you look at, you can see here we've summed it, but from a customer, how quickly did what's the days from getting a demo to a close? What's the close rate? And then when you roll those up, you can do a roll up summary by the common segments. So vertical, size, geography, you can start seeing what stands out. So for example, this is one of my clients that had a more open funnel. And one of the first things that we did is say, let's narrow in so that we can really get the team focused. And also there are some certain features for each of these that were different from their competitors. So not only different from their competitors, but make sure, let's go after the things that right now you're already closing. So we have enough of them in the database. You're closing them at a higher rate, and they're staying on board. So they're profitable. They're more profitable for you. And let's just focus on those. And so we took we started with the top 3 here. And then as we needed more leads, we expanded. But it's an easy way for you to just get your team focused on one thing and not worry so much about the what ifs that are out there. Once you know that target customer, this is where we're going to talk about the value prop. Because the one thing you'll want to do is make sure that, okay, it looks like we're solving their problem. They're happy. They're staying on board. So what exactly are we doing for them? And when you know that, you need to understand what keeps them up at night, right? Quit feature dumping. One of the most common things, and most organizations I walk into, and I read the emails that the salespeople are sending, and it is this list of, here's all the things that our product has. When people send me those emails, I just delete them. I can't even, get my attention. Tell me what problem you're going to solve for me. And if it's something that I need help with, that's going to get my attention. So let me give you an example of what I mean. You can see here, I've got some examples from Zenefits. When I first came on board the team, Zenefits is an HR platform that automates all of your HR processes, but there's also some really interesting things that they do around, helping you reduce your overall benefit spend, ACA compliance, which is a big headache for companies, that actually solves real problems and reduces there's a real value and ROI there. But when I was getting on phones with my SDRs, their thought was, they're somehow, because they didn't really have a process and they hadn't tested what works, had morphed into, hey, we're just reducing the hassle and time. I'm calling this low-level HR person or this mid-level manager because I can usually get them on the phone right away. And then I talk to them about how we have this free tool and that automates all their HR tasks. It's just going to make their life better. Is it great? Okay, if we set up a demo. And so we were getting this high number of demos, but our hold rate and then obviously our conversion to opportunities was super low. And so going back and understanding, okay, let's take a step back and understand, what are we actually solving? Who are we solving it for? Because the person that's signing the contract was the CFO. They're the people signing that. They own the budget. They own the expenses. The second biggest expense in your budget is usually your benefits. And when they're thinking about, okay, how can I also reduce expenses? And they're obviously, most CFOs are risk averse. And this ACA thing is coming up, and now we're going to have to spend money on that. I need to make sure we're compliant so we don't get fined. The fines are pretty outrageous. They're the person that's staying up at night thinking about that. So we needed to change who we were calling into. We needed to change the value prop that we were talking to them, because they don't give a shit, frankly, about free HR tools. But what they did care about is that we're reducing benefit spend by 3 to 5% for other customers and eliminating your ACA risk. So you don't have to worry about getting fined. We do it all for you. And by doing that, we were able to increase our held demos by 50%. But more importantly, we converted over 75% of them to real opportunities. Right decision maker, right value prop. Unfortunately, in some cases, it's the wrong target market. But so think about, have you identified that for your own company? A lot of times I'll see that the CEO actually has, and the CEO talks about it and has really, talks about it internally and in PR, but somehow that hasn't translated to actually who the sales team is calling and how they're positioning the product. Now you've got all of those pieces, okay, here's who we need to sell. Here's our target, or we've identified our customer. We know how we're going to go after them, but now we need a real process. So what are the steps that we need to take to go and find those people, move them to a customer? Who's responsible for each step? What's the criteria that makes them eligible to get to move to the next step? What tools does your team need to move them to the next step? And then what technology is supporting it? And I think this is a great illustration. This is something I use with my clients just at a high level to start understanding what they have and what they don't have, and to start building out a deeper sales process. Now you'll have to evaluate. Criteria is going to be different. Sales qualified for one company is not the same as another. But again, once you've identified your target customer profile, then it's easy to go back and say, okay, well then to be sales qualified, they have to be this decision maker and this kind of company with these attributes with, and in some cases you might require some other specific things, that their timing is within the next 3 months, that they're, so you can go and look at the traditional sales qualification methods and then put those tools in place. The other thing I think that's interesting is then a lot of times when folks see this, they think, oh, wait, I don't have any of this really, or we've got some pieces, but wow, so my salesperson could potentially be a lot more effective if I had this in place. And that's where they could not only be more effective, you're going to be a lot more effective because you're going to know what's working. And with this, that's how you create your sales funnel, right? So if you're seeing that you keep getting hung up on, you've got a bunch of leads that you're qualifying, but they don't show up for your demo, or they don't move past demo. You're demoing them, but then you're qualifying them out. Then you can dig into the why. What's happening there? What do we need to fix? How do we prioritize that? The second thing I want to touch on is the technology piece. So there is a lot of talk these days in sales about your sales stack. What do you have in your sales stack? Technology is really changing the way that we sell. I think, it's also changing the way that customers buy. Just like you're buying as a consumer, now B2B customers can get a lot of information. They're spending time doing their own research. So by the time they do show up for a demo, most of the time they do have 50% of what they need. And now they really want to understand, is this going to meet their needs? Which is why it's also so crucial to have a sales team that can really dig in, ask the right questions, and customize that demo. Because if you don't, and you're showing them stuff they already know, it is completely frustrating. That's a separate piece. But But what I'd say is you don't have to have all that technology to start off. If you've got less than 10 sales team members, you need a CRM. And I know Salesforce is the most popular, but some people, a Pipedrive is really good for smaller teams, and you can graduate to Salesforce. You need a lead database. So you do need to have, leads that you're generating, and you need some kind of email marketing tool. But again, you don't need to have Marketo. You don't need to go out and, get the Barneys or the biggest one, the Nordstroms of marketing tools. You can get something like HubSpot that can help you start getting some email marketing and start to generate some acquisition campaigns to your target customers, or do some nurturing campaigns. And then what you can do is get an idea of what your funnel looks like now, and then prioritize what technology you want to test by where you need help. So a lot of my clients, the top of the funnel, in a lot of places is the biggest place, once we get their skills up, but it's also easier to move the top of the funnel. So in some cases it may be that, they want to test a dialer to see if they can gain efficiency there. And then it's a lot easier, or a prospect outreach tool. So if you've got something that's doing your cadence on emails, and so your team's just calling, but they don't actually have to go send the email, there is a lot of efficiency gains there. I've seen it roughly 25%, and that translates to more demos. But then you can measure all those and test them and make sure that there's a return on investment for you. Number 5, now we're ready to hire. So see what I did there? We didn't hire number 1. We didn't come in and say, oh, ready to build a team, let's go hire number 1. There's actually 4 steps, because the thing is, this person's starting, and you need to at least have some semblance for them to be successful, to tell them here's what you're calling on. This is the process we're going to use. Now, again, there's always room to continue to grow and build that, but we'll talk about why that's important for them in a minute too, and not just you. But with this process, you can now define the roles that you need. So once you've got that sales process in place, it's easy to walk back and say, like, wow, actually it would help us if we had an SDR qualifying all these, because then we could have more AEs. And that's something, when in your plan you need to think about. Typically SDRs from a cost acquisition standpoint don't work unless your ARR per customer is 3,000 to 4,000. But you can start to figure that out, because you've got a process that makes it easier to look at that. As you've defined your roles, then you want to create your profile. And that's where I find it helps to get everyone, who's helping to hire on board, and thinking about who person we want to hire. And that's a combination of what skills do they have, what experience do we need them to have, but then also, what is your culture like, and where are people going to be, make sure you're bringing people in that are a fit for your culture. And so I've got an example here from Main Street Hub, and how we developed our candidate profile, so that people, and then we also, we had an interview process that interviewed for these things outside of their skill set and just some of the basic abilities of being in sales. And then get your process in place. So sales, hiring, just like sales, it's a funnel and it's a process. And so, when you're posting, you need to know where you posting, what different avenues and sources, or how are you going to source this? How many leads do you need to get in based on what your ratio is to getting them in for an interview and then hiring? Who is actually going to be doing the hiring? Who's going to be doing the upfront? Who's going to be doing the hiring? And then what are you interviewing for? And who is interviewing for each? So at Living Social, this is one place we got this down to a science. We had to hire a lot of people quickly. We were ready to scale. When I joined, there was only 40 folks, and we were in less than 10 markets, and our goal was to be in 144 markets by the end of the year. So that's a lot of AEs to hire. And one of the things we found is that, when you're doing it one-off, and you guys have probably seen this in your own organization, the challenge of just getting, the first interview and then the second person, and scheduling all of these around your own schedule and their schedule, and also making sure you're all on the same page. You finally get through 3 different interviews, and you get together and you find out that, you all kind of interviewed for the same thing, but nobody actually interviewed for this other specific skill that you think is really important. It can be frustrating, but it's competitive now, and you'll lose great talent that way. So what we did was we created super sessions at Living Social, and I now replicated that at other companies I've worked for and with clients, where we just really focused on, there we flew customers in, but you can do it the same way. Like, create days that are your hiring days. I recommend 2 mornings a week, depending on how many people you're hiring. But if you're doing 4 or 5 interviews a week for salespeople, then block off 2 hours on Tuesday and 2 hours on Thursday, or 3 hours. And that way your recruiters, whoever knows when to schedule them, then decide what's the process they're coming in. So at Living Social, we did a culture interview first for 30 minutes. And that helped us really see, like, first calm people's nerves, but also make sure that, if they said, when you're interviewing with somebody you think is your peer, people will tend to say things that they wouldn't say otherwise. Helps you kind of knock out some of that factor. Then they'd come in and they'd do a role play. They were given 2 profiles of clients ahead of time. And there we really looked for sales methodology. Did they ask questions? Did they at least have some basic idea of what we did? Did they try and close us? So we're looking for, do they have some of the basic fundamentals? And then the last one was a behavioral. And that's where we really looked at, will they do the job? Are they passionate about it? Do they have some of the soft skills that we need? What's their critical thinking? And then we scored them all as we were going. And that afternoon, there was a 30-minute session. We went around and we made decisions. So it didn't also become this 2 days of trying to follow up with people. And then the next morning, we gave out offers. So whether you're hiring, hundreds of people, or you're hiring 5 people, that same process still works. I've used it at Main Street Hub. We used it at Zenefits. And now I've used it at clients. And it just helps you all be coordinated. It's also such a better experience for the candidate. And in a market where you are, you're competing for talent, having them come in and feel like you got your shit together. There is a process. They were asked great questions. It just makes a difference. The last couple things I'll say are, if in doubt, I would hire an athlete over experience. There are very few roles anymore. And there are some, but that really you need to know the industry. Relationship selling is not as prevalent, especially in technology. And so getting somebody that's willing to come in and is coachable and hungry and passionate and an achiever I will take that person and groom them if you've got these steps any day over just somebody that's sold potentially that product before or just has relationships. And if you're bringing people in, having 2 people so that they can pace, and it also helps you kind of create that atmosphere of them winning together is helpful. Okay, so we've got your people on board. Now, a step that a lot of folks skip, which is give them a why. So get them excited about the vision. Most companies have a vision, but a lot of times that vision overall for your company is a 3 or 4 year vision. It's, hey, here's what we're going to be long term, and this is what we're striving to do. And salespeople need a shorter term. They need to know how are these things I'm doing every day going, how am I contributing to success? So, you can build confidence and trust quickly by sharing with them, hey, this is what we're doing. And it can be a month, it could be a quarter. This is an example from Living Social where we did something where we started doing yearly. And then every month when I did the first of the month and we went over what happened that month, we always talked about, this is how we're pacing towards this. And this is what we're doing this month to continue to impact this and to help you be successful. So it also just helps you clearly communicate, but it really does keep your team focused on the why. And a lot of you have probably watched Simon Sinek's Starts With Why, but that's not just for your customers, it's also for your team too. So think about how you leverage that on your team and keep your team focused on the things that are going to drive results. Now, the next step of that is now you need to bring it down to what's in it for them. So they want to know what's in it for them. How are you defining success for that role? And what do they get when they achieve it? They need a daily and weekly plan. So it's not enough. I know sometimes it's hard to understand that because you think, well, half their compensation is on hitting these goals. So if I, half my compensation is on that, I'm going to see, I need to sell 5,000 in MRR a month. That means that's probably 10 to 15 accounts, depending on which package I sell. Now let me go make sure I'm doing that. But the reality is, again, most people aren't Steph Curry. They don't put that together. And especially if they're, more earlier in their career, they need help to back into a daily and weekly plan and create those habits that are going to make them successful. So you can see, here's something from Zenefits but I've actually done this at every role, where we just very clearly align for them. Like, this is how you're measured monthly, right? You're measured by the lives that are closed and by your opportunities, but we're also going to be looking at who's promoting and your pipeline. And so in order to do that, these are the activities you need to have on a weekly or daily basis to get there. And this is how we're going to be measuring your success. And now that helps you with performance expectations, because if people aren't hitting their goal, it's really easy to back into, okay, but you're not getting enough demos, or you're setting a ton of demos, but none of them are holding. So that's obviously where the problem is. And that goes back to the funnel management. But that way they know exactly what they need to do. And then you can create fun contests. You can do things around, continuing to manage. It's a lot easier to motivate around actions that they can actually, that they are directly responsible for. They can make enough calls or send enough emails to schedule a demo. That is something they can directly control. Sometimes what they can't control is if it closes, or the timing of a customer, or if there's a product fit. But what they can control is demos. They can control at-bats. And so the more that you can focus on the at-bats that they need, and just making sure that you've got a process that gets them the right prospects to get those at-bats, the easier it is to control the outcome and the revenue. And then making sure that you're giving them some recognition. So something that has become more and more prevalent, and y'all have seen it, and depending on what market you're in, is retention. The average AE, at least in San Francisco, is 14 months, and they're recruited. And a lot of times what they say is not so much, I'm not making the money, although the money becomes an issue if it's more about if it's more when they're not happy. But it's about recognition, and it's about feeling like I'm accomplishing and moving. So putting something, I feel like it's never too, once you get 4 or 5 reps, start thinking about a career path and roll it out, because you'll keep them focused on, and if you make it so that it's, once you achieve this, and by the way, you can do it in 3 months or 6 months, then they're focused on continuing to hit their goals because they want to hit that next level. And you can align that with perks. I've done that at all of my companies and now with my clients, and it makes such a big difference. It keeps the team focused on those things, and their both their productivity and their retention. Okay, we're coming into the end here. Invest in the art, not just the science. So, we've talked a lot about hiring. We've talked about, getting the right plan in place. Just make sure that you're giving your team the tools, and that you're giving your leaders, or whoever is the structure and the tools as well, to continue to develop and motivate those people. You've defined success, and you're now set expectations. Don't just then leave them out there. They need to continue to get better. They want to feel like they're improving. They want to see it in their performance, even if it's just in seeing, I used to only be able to set, this many demos, or I was only holding this many demos, or my close rate was only 20% and now it's 25%. That's going to motivate them, and that's going to keep them in the game. So having a culture where you have a monthly focus in each of these, and what I've always done with leaders, and I've done myself, is each month look at, okay, what are we doing around talent? How many people do we need to hire, and what's our process, and are there things we can do better there? What are we doing around making sure that we're giving our team really clear focus and expectations? And then what are we doing to develop them and motivate them? And there's technology, again, that you can use to help you with some of this. I don't think, before your several $1 million that it's required. A lot of this you can do in Salesforce, and with just standard templates. Make sure you ramp your folks and you continue to develop them, and you're creating that culture. So I like to think of it like, I don't know anyone that's ever taken a golf lesson and then gone out on the course and shot an 82. It just doesn't happen. It takes months or years of ongoing practice to get that good. So why I talk to companies and they're hiring these amazing salespeople, or these people that they think are going to take their company to the next level, and they're really investing all this money to get them on board. Then they go to a day or a week of training, which a lot of times is just sitting through, here's how the product works, and here's how, a lot of product training, which is important, but not always the training they need, because then they need to understand how to sell the product. And then they expect them to hit their goal and continue to improve. They're just put out there. So you need a program that's creating the right habits and incorporates several learning styles to change the behavior. And it'll also give you the opportunity to quickly evaluate. In all of my roles, we've had to scale folks quickly. And so I built out a program, because at the same time we had to scale, we were bringing new people in. We had to get them up to productivity. We had to get managers invested in making sure that that happened. And but we had to change behavior. You have to get people in and quickly teach them. And so Main Street Hub is a great example of, I had hired 200 people in 4 months. We were also going through steps 1 through 8. So we were still getting a lot of those pieces in place. And so we'd had this tenured team that I had inherited that was not as productive as the new team, because they had developed old habits. They were still calling the wrong decision maker. using, a different sales strategy, not the same value prop. And so we wanted to get everybody on the same page. So we broke down the sales process into the 4 stages of the sales, 4 steps of the sales call. And then we just focused on each step each week. So we made it a 4-week program. We called it Back to Basics. And with that, we did interactive group exercises. They had one-on-one peer exercises. They had a list of activity checklists that they had to do. It was gamified. They had to earn points. They had a performance challenge each week and an activities they had to complete. And at the end, they were getting certified. So they had to earn enough points to get certified, and they also won prizes. But the result was amazing, and we doubled the productivity. But we actually changed their behavior because they practiced one thing for a week in several different ways and got really good at it before we then went to the next step. So I've now used the same program at Zenefits, and I've modified that program, and I use that with my clients today. And then it gives your coaches or you, if you're coaching them, a real foundation, because everybody understands what should be happening at every stage, and they have the tools to continue to coach that. Lastly, have fun, keep your team engaged with incentives, but make sure that you're using them effectively. The whole, hey, first person that closes a deal today gets $100 isn't really the most effective way to use your incentive behavior. I think that contests and incentives are great, or where I've seen them be most effective is to change behavior. So if you want your team, they're now calling on one vertical and you need them to call on another, then or you're doing a competitor strategy, then you roll that out and say, okay, this month is going to be, boat tours month. And for every boat tour, we've given you those leads. We're going to do a lot. Every week is a training around how to set the demos, what their needs are. You can basically focus all of those steps around development and motivation around that. And for each one that you sign up, we're giving you an extra whatever. Now you're actually getting them to go and call on the things that you want them to call on. Or you can use it to test a change before you implement it. If you're thinking about changing something in your comp plan, you can actually run that as a quarterly bonus or a monthly bonus and see if it works to drive the right behavior. So as you grow, you'll want to think about how to develop and retain your top performers. It's not necessarily something you need to do right away, but you'll layer on more long-term incentives like President's Trip or team lead and mentor opportunities. But early on, you just want to see people continue to get better. Okay, so it does work. And if you put all those together, this is an example of a client that went through all of those steps, and you can see the results that they've had. Last couple points about measuring what matters, and then we'll open it up. I think that there's some questions coming in. Just focus on your funnel. With a measure, the great thing about having a sales process is you can measure this and you can see where you have opportunity. And this is an example from Main Street Hub when we would do this on a monthly basis. An easy place to start is usually getting more demos, because again, the law of averages says you'll score more baskets if you're taking more shots. But from here, what you can do is define how many leads it takes to get a demo, how many demos it takes to get a deal, and therefore how many leads your AE has to touch in a month to hit that goal. And then, align with your marketing strategy and your database and make sure that you can deliver those. And monthly, there's a different set of KPIs you'll want to look at, and you'll want to look at them trending and over time. This is just an example of what I've used in the past. You may have some differences, but at least gives you something to continue to measure yourself and see how you're trending. And as you're measuring yourself and you're putting those ROIs against that funnel, just track them. Make sure they're working. I see a lot of times where people say, oh, we're going to go out and do this, this, and this. And then they start implementing things, but they never even go back and track and see if it works. So make sure, is it working? Is it creating results? And if it's not, don't do it anymore, because then it just creates noise. And if you're not sure if something's going to create results, just test it. Get a small group, test it, and then you can get buy-in from some of your people and make sure it works before you roll it out to your team. So there's several questions that you can ask yourself. We've gone through those. And in fact, what we'll do is we'll send out a sales checklist that you can use to just benchmark yourself and see how you're doing on your sales process. And do you need certain things in there? I think Michael Jordan says it best, that if you focus on getting the fundamentals in place, then you're on your way to growth and productivity. You've got a thriving, happy team. You're going to have a successful exit. So the thing you should be asking yourself is, are the habits that you have today on par with your dreams for tomorrow? And with that, I think we've got some questions, but I know we're getting close
Wow,
to the end.
amazing. Thank you so much, Mandy. That was really, really informative, and I learned a ton. We're going to open up for questions, but one thing that we're going to also do is we are going to ask each of you to fill out our NPS survey. So I've just launched the link to our NPS survey. So while we answer questions, if you can go ahead and also fill out the survey for us, we would really appreciate it, and we really value your feedback. Okay, so we are going to stay for another 15 minutes. I'm assuming, Mandy, you can stay for another 15 minutes
Yes.
to answer questions. And for those of you who have to drop, you can drop. We'll send out the recording afterwards. For those of you who would like to stay and get your questions answered, we will do that too. So first question it was from Sankara. So Sankara asks, you've spoken about the need to coach your salespeople and help them improve. What advice do you have for a founder who is not an expert at sales, but looking to hire a top-notch sales team? How do you manage the coaching and then grow them?
Great question. So I think there's a couple ways to do that. If you're think about when you'll need to bring in somebody that potentially is a coach, or in some cases, I know people grow folks from their team. If you're doing that, just make sure you really have somebody that can coach that person. So if you're hiring a couple people, you might not necessarily need a VP of sales or a director of sales yet. So in that case, it's really, do you have a sales process in place? Do they at least have those fundamentals? And then can you spend time with them? So do you have, or is there somebody on your team that can at least dedicate to meeting with them once a week and just making sure that they understand that you're helping them with their funnel, removing obstacles, and can get on a call with them once a week? A lot of times it is the founder or CEO, because you are still selling, you've been selling, and you want to know and make sure. In other cases, it might be somebody else on your team. But I'd say, if you're thinking about, I need to be at 5 people or more, then getting somebody in, it doesn't necessarily have to be a VP. Again, it might be a director. There are also other folks like me out there that come in and help people with that too. So if you think, I'm not ready to hire my VP of sales, but I would like to have somebody that's helping my team get there, there's resources out there that can help you do that.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so Joseph asks, what CRM would you recommend for a SaaS company? Is Salesforce your preferred option, or is there something else you'd recommend?
For a SaaS company, I don't know that it matters actually. Most CRMs are not driven around marketplace. Salesforce is the most widely used. The thing about Salesforce is you can use it all the way down your customer lifecycle. And so from your acquisition, your marketing team can use it, your sales team can use it, your customer success team can use it. You can really manage your full customer lifecycle. You can also interface directly with customers, and there's tons of apps that you can build on top of it. So in terms of being the most scalable long-term, I'm a fan of Salesforce. It's not a UI. I mean, the UI is pretty ugly. So that's why there are a lot of technology companies that have built applications on top of it. But that's my preference, and that's what I use. Again, there's a couple of other smaller ones. If you have a small team, I know HubSpot has a CRM, and there's also a company called Pipedrive, and their UIs are better. So they're a little more user-friendly in terms of the steps that your sales team needs to use. They don't, the downside is that as you grow, they don't have as much functionality around integrating other systems that you're using, being able to keep everything in one place and be one source of record.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Tanmira asks, we're struggling to close deals post-demo. So despite extreme excitement around the product, the issue is urgency towards closure. What can we do about that? So the worst case is that the lead will say that they'll get back 2 to 3 months later and fizzles out.
Yeah. So that I'll get back to you means I didn't see enough value to make a decision. I mean, that's usually what that comes down to. That's where you can go up the funnel. And first of all, I'd make sure that, are you talking to the person that makes the decision, and have you qualified them around their timing, their budget, their needs, and that there's not a potential product, I call them a product knockout or a blocker, that they need that you don't have. But if all of those things match and you're still not qualifying them, then it's something around your value prop and how you're positioning your product and you're solving their needs, typically. Because think about it, the reason people buy is because you're either, it's a pleasure or pain thing. They're either seeing how you're going to make their life so much better, or you're going to remove a big pain point they have now or they're going to have in the future. And if they're willing to put you off 2 or 3 months, they didn't get that from you. And that's where a lot of times, again, I'll see that it's either got to be that they're qualified. So were you talking to the right person in the first place and they matched all of your qualification? And then if you determine that that's a yes, then there's something that's happening there that you're not demonstrating, that you're not understanding their problem, and you're not demonstrating you're going to solve it for them, and that you're going to do it better than what they've got right now.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions here that were submitted around the sales interview. So Kevin asks, what is your favorite interview question to ask BD or sales candidates? And Leslie also asks, what types of questions do your folks ask during a culture interview? And then do they have a script or a scoring rubric for consistency?
Yes. So I do believe in having at least 4 or 5 kind of set questions for each of those interviews, just so that if you've agreed internally, these are the things we're going to interview for, then you also need to agree then how you're going to interview for them, and that you're all making decisions on consistent data again. So for my favorite question to ask, I'm very big on coachability. I think these days in a lot of my roles, I have hired folks that are still growing and learning. And so bringing somebody into an organization, especially if you're going to have a new hire ramping program like the ones that my clients have, and you're going to continue to develop them, you need somebody that's open to that. And it's also the only way you're going to get their trust and their buy-in. Things are going to change quickly in your organization. You're going to keep looking at your funnel, optimizing, and realizing, oh, this works better than this. And you've got to get your team's buy-in to actually try and do those things differently. And so people that are coachable are more moldable to that. So when I'm interviewing for the coachability piece, I will ask them, tell me about a time when you got feedback from your direct manager on something that you needed to improve and what you did with that. And it's really interesting how many people, A, can't even think of a time they got feedback, B, say things like, oh, well, I do such a good job, my manager doesn't give me feedback. And versus the people that are like, you know what, that happened 3 months ago, let me tell you what happened. I am a huge believer in tell me about a time, because you can quickly tell if people actually have a time. So the other one that I'll look at in terms of their resilience is, tell me about a time when you were pacing behind goal for a month. And if they haven't sold before, then I look at, like, did they play sports or something else? And tell me about a time when you were pacing behind, what you did to catch up. Because I want to see, do they just give up? Are they negative? Or do they actually look at what my plan could be? So those are a couple of my favorite interview questions. The second one that you talked about is the culture. On the culture piece, and I'm trying to remember, but we did have specific questions on those, and I'm trying to remember a couple of my favorite ones. But I think a lot of what we would talk about is, tell me why we know why we're talking to you. Why are you talking to us today? Because you can have somebody that's an ops, or that's, a team lead on your team, or that's another role that maybe necessarily doesn't have a sales acumen, interview on a culture. So, tell me why you're interested in us. Tell me what you like about your current job. What's frustrating about your current role? What kind of atmosphere are you looking for? And so that, there's things that you can just get. It's interesting when you ask people what they like about their current job and then what's frustrating, what comes out too. And if they start talking about a lot of the things that are the same culture that you have, then that person probably isn't going to be a fit. But there's potentially some things that they would never say that. People are more on their better behavior when they're interviewing with the person they think is the hiring manager.
Okay, great. Now we have a couple of questions that we'll sort of do both at once. It's questions around scale. So one of our participants asked, when is a good moment to scale? When do we know when we should start hiring salespeople? And then a very specific question that's related from Walt is, what is your estimate of the minimum cost to start your scaling process from scratch? Start with sole rainmaker to get to profitability. So currently 1 million in revenue, but not profitable. So I think, there's a bunch of questions on here. It's like, when is the right time to scale? Do you need to also have a certain number of revenue or profits, or how do we think about when to start?
Yeah, so I don't know that I think most organizations aren't profitable when they start to scale, but I think what they figured out is okay, we've identified that we have a product market fit. So we've got, we've got this product and it's solving these needs for at least a decent amount of customers. And, so we're going to go out and sign up more of those and see if that continues to hold. And by the way, we think the addressable market is big enough that if we do that, we can continue to grow our business. So it's pretty normal that you're not going to be profitable when you're scaling. What I think you need to have at a minimum is a way to continue to measure and make sure, because it goes back to your plan, right? If you want to hit revenue at the end of the year, your plan probably comes down to, I need to have people signing this many deals at this revenue. And by the way, you don't want them to churn. You need them to stay. So if you do that at first as the founder and you get 20 and you kind of figure that out, yes, you can get one person on board. And maybe that person is sort of a player coach. You're hiring the person that, has managed a team before, but you're saying, but at first, what I need you to do is go out and continue to sell these and define this process so we can bring other people in. And let's just continue to test this litmus. So before I would go out though and hire 5 people, or I would make sure that you could tell them from day one, this is your goal, this is how you're going to get paid. And that translates to, I expect you to have this many demos weekly. This is how we're going to be giving you leads. You need to kind of start deciding, like, from a lead perspective. And I talked about, they need to have leads. They, are they inbound leads? Are they outbound leads? It's usually a mixture of both. And if it's outbound, is an SDR calling on that for them, or are they? It's very normal sometimes, to start with one salesperson, but then your second hire to add an SDR if you know that you can support it. And that way you've got somebody now. And an SDR is a great way, frankly. I mean, once you've kind of figured out that process, an SDR is a great way to figure out in a much quicker way and how quickly you can build into that funnel. Is your value prop working? You can test some things with them, because if you're getting people to the table and you know that it's in your target market because those customers are successful, then you can start to divide those 2 roles and you'll just be more efficient and effective. You've got one person setting the demos, the other person holding them, and you'll continue to grow that way. That's
Awesome. Hey, Mandy, I think there's some static coming from your end. So I don't know if it's the headset. You might want to try to responding to the next couple of questions without the headset and see if it solves anything. But
is
we'll
that better?
And ask a couple more questions before we wrap up here. So let's see. One question comes from Anil, which is, does the sales process change if one is focused not on small, medium business sales, but on mid-market or enterprise?
The sales process is, there's the sales, fundamentally a sales process is the same, right? You're bringing customers through a process. Think of it like, what is the process I'm using to go and talk to the people I think are my prospects, my highest level, and then get them on board with our product. Now, what will change is the resources that you're using, the roles that you're using, the way that your potentially the tools that your team has. So, in enterprise and mid-market, and a lot of that, what ties into that is your sales cycle. So if you have a 2-week sales cycle, then you don't need quite as many tools to continue to keep those warm. Where in an enterprise sale, sometimes there's more things that go into fundamentally qualifying them, right? It's around a budget. It's around you're replacing a piece of technology that they already have. And so, that's a process. There's more decision makers involved. And so ultimately that process on the actual call does tend to be longer. And yes, then you would qualify. For some of my clients, the steps from getting to prospect to close are 5. And for others, it's 7 or 8, because that conversation is first a discovery call. We're going to qualify, make sure we got the right decision makers, make sure that this even makes sense for them. And then the second call is more of a demo. And then from there, it could be a timing issue. Now you're building a pipeline so that which is what you want to do so you can start forecasting. But that process to get them there will potentially look different in terms of the steps and the resources and the tools that you need.
Okay, great. And I think we'll just answer 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up here. So one question, and it's interesting, I always get this question from VP of products around working with founders, but curious what your thoughts are around sort of VP of sales. So you're sort of a VP of sales, how do you deal with a founder or CEO who is constantly and politically interfering with your entire sales organization, which ultimately affects selling culture and performance?
Yeah. Okay. Luckily, none of my founder CEOs have really done that, but I understand what you're saying. And what I found though for me too is that my CEOs have been they've got a lot of different things, and most of them are product and finance. So they really once I had built trust with them, they did give me leeway and respected my decision. But what I would say is the way that I did a lot of that, if they're going and they're talking directly and interfering, my gut tells me that potentially they think that you're not doing something they think you should be doing. And a lot of times that comes from communication and from understanding, and how you manage up, frankly. So some of the things that I started doing as early back as my new place, and I didn't talk about them as much, but they're actually very relevant to this in terms of how we grew. But and then even is I would do the plan, share the plan, but I would even send weekly Friday updates. Like, by the way, here's where we are in an email. Here's where we're tracking. Here are the bigger initiatives that we're focused on, and here's how those are happening. So that my CEOs felt even before, because a lot of times when we'd have our one-on-one, it started with, and rightfully so, they had 2 or 3 things that they wanted to make sure we were talking about, but sometimes we didn't potentially talk about actually the state of the business and what I'd identify as things that were working well, and then risks. And by the way, we said we were doing these things, and here's what's happening with them, and here's what I'm doing to solve that. And so I just started doing, and that's what I've done my whole time is Friday updates. I do it now for my clients before I meet with the CEOs each week, just giving them a quick snapshot so that they feel like, okay, I understand at a high level what's going on. And then they can also ask specific questions. So that's one thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is ask them about it. I'm a big believer in always asking for feedback, but I think you can approach that conversation as, hey, I want to make sure that we're on the same page right now. I'm really trying to drive consistency around the team. And so I think it's confusing for them if they're hearing one thing from me and one thing from you. So I just want to level set with you. And can we talk about, A, do you have feedback for me? And are there some things that you think I should be doing differently? And B, how we can more effectively together communicate to the team. And then follow up with an email and say, hey, thanks so much. I'm glad that we had that conversation. I think a lot of times they just don't realize they're doing it. It's their company. They're excited, and they are thinking about the impact both on your team and you. And when you have that conversation, it's just a realization.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll ask one more question and then we'll wrap up. So Mia asks, what is the best way to make inside sales support on field sales, especially in terms of motivation in the big picture?
The inside sales support on field sales. So this is a big challenge we had at Living Social, and to the point where I actually then did a huge thing around, bringing our 2 teams together and naming one Living and the other Social, and how we couldn't do it without each other. I think the biggest things that helped us there were tying their goals together. So first of all, just being very clear about who's doing what, why they're doing it, how you're both fitting into the big picture. You have to then outline guidelines. Salespeople do not operate well in gray. And fundamentally, that's what's hard about a startup is there's a lot of gray, and you want them to be flexible. But the reality is, like, they want a plan. They want black and white. And so the more ambiguous you are about who can sell what, the more you're just going to have a lot of in-team fighting versus if you're saying, this is our process, and this is what inside sales is doing, and this is what outside sales is, or another sales team is doing. And so therefore, here's the criteria of who you're each selling. Here's how you're getting your leads. And then you can do something like, if there's geography or verticals, pod them together, doing contests where they're together and trying to win, teaming them up and having buddies or a mentor program, anything you can do to help them start getting best practices and learning from each other. And then you have to keep promoting that. And by the way, every time you have to say, this is why we're doing it, and this is how it's going to work. And then you have to keep showing everybody, see, this is what's happening. It's working. Here's an example. Do a best practice panel and just, promote.
Thank you, Mandy. Okay, looks like we're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We had a lot of great feedback throughout that they found the webinar incredible. We will be sending out the recordings and the slides. I know a lot of folks are very interested in having access to them, so we'll send them out. And please do fill out our NPS survey as we really value the feedback. I will paste the link into the chat once again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you, Mandy, for being such an amazing instructor today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ha. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Take care. Bye.